Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Kos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Good morning, welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, head honcho of the John Curtin Research Centre. I'm joined by my great mate and co-conspirator, Kung Fu Kos Samaras. How are you, Kosy?
Good, thanks, mate.
I was going to say Happy Easter, but for even for you Greek atheists, mate, you've got to wait a few more days yet. Anyway, I hope you had a great long weekend there, Kos. And wowee, Kos, wowee, what a week in global politics. Whew. Where do we start, Kos? Donald Trump overnight has been lashing away at allies and friends, including Australia, Japan and South Korea for not hopping in and helping him out to liberate or to open up the Strait of Hormuz there in the Persian Gulf. We have seen Trump using Trump's Truth Social to threaten Iran with all manner of punishments. I never thought I would see Donald Trump praising Allah, but he's been doing that as well. We're living through very strange times, very strange times, and we've got a great guest to help steer us and our listeners, our Curtinistas, through what some are already calling the beginnings and the outlines of World War III. And in fact, our guest today, Misha Zelinsky, says it's already begun.
Yes.
Misha Zelinsky not only is a mate of mine and a mate of yours, Kosy, he is a leading expert on geopolitics and global authoritarianism. He's a Fulbright Scholar, economist, lawyer, author. He did some incredible reporting from on the ground in Ukraine during the early stages of Russia's invasion for the Australian Financial Review, work that led to his sanctioning by the Putin regime. And I'm there. I got sanctioned too, cause not for reporting on the ground for Ukraine. He's a London School of Economics graduate, expert associate at Australia's National Security College, and was a long-time director of Australian Super. I first met Misha when he was Assistant National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, and he is a very respected former unionist and public policy thinker. He writes widely on democracy, national security and geopolitics. His latest book, The Sun Will Rise, which is a novel, drawing its inspiration from Ukraine's struggle against Putin's Russia, was published in 2023. Misha Zelinsky, welcome to Curtin's Cast.
Thanks so much for being here. I don't get a nickname like Kos, though. Kung Fu Kos Samaras. I'm new to that. I love that, but maybe I'll get one by the end.
Mish, the Z. You get the Z.
No relation.
The big Z. I know, it's spelt differently as well. The big Z.
Correct.
It's great to have you here, mate. People have been talking for a decade now that we are living through a decade which appears to resemble the 1930s, but you're saying it's not just repeating the 1930s, we're seeing other historical parallels with World War I, the lead up to World War I, and the Cold War. And you've written a brilliant Substack. Get across to the Misha Substack. Misha, it's the bad guys are...
Beating the bad guys.
Beating the bad guys. It's a great Substack name, Beating the Bad Guys. You're suggesting that drawing on the historical parallels, pre-war World I miscalculation by the great powers, 1930s appeasement, Cold War instability, that in fact the world in the 2020s is seeing a combination of the worst combination of all three. Tell us what you mean. And are we not just on the verge of World War III? Has the starter's gun actually been fired and we're here during World War III?
Well, of course, we won't know until after the fact. I always say that the good news about World War II, if there is any good news, is that we won. We might want to skip to the end. It's not exactly a great read, but, you don't know, obviously, what the historical outcome will be. But when Ukraine, when Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened in 2022, and it's scary to think that's now 4 years ago, right? You mentioned, me covering the war there. I sort of can't believe it's been 4 years of that war. It's now 5th year. It's been going for a long, long time. And I said at the time then, and I've been saying it since, is we didn't know whether or not we were at the beginning of the end, where essentially became very clear to dictators around the world that wars of conquest were no longer a viable thing to do. So was it going to be a massive folly for Putin? And it has been a strategic folly for Putin in many ways. But would it be a disaster that wouldn't be repeated by others like Xi Jinping or North Korea or others when they look at that and say, you know what, bad idea, don't try to invade your neighbours? Or in the end, would it be a strategic victory that others will draw inspiration from? 4 years in, we don't know, but it's edging closer and closer and closer to Putin looking like he might snatch a tremendous victory from the jaws of defeat, right? So he should lose when you look at all the parameters. His economy is tanked. His military is being humiliated. They've lost prestige and power around the world. It's cost an absolute fortune. But despite all of that, it might be possible that they'll snatch a victory from the jaws of impending defeat. So that's one question, right? But since then, of course, we've then got a full-scale war underway since October 7 of 2023 in the Middle East, which is now 2.5 years long, and it's had various iterations. So you kind of look at those two things together. And going back a little bit further, we've had an enormous amount of rising tension throughout East Asia with saber-rattling by the Chinese Communist Party, increasingly under Xi Jinping, talk of taking Taiwan. As Xi has instructed his military that they need to be ready to take Taiwan by 2027, which I remember when that date first got moved, it felt like a long way away. Of course, it's next year. He's not saying that they will, but they need to be ready to do it. And he's now purged his army generals recently, so that military is now completely and utterly loyal to Xi. So asking me the question, are we into something that looks like World War II or World War I? I'll come back to the sort of the three different ways in which they resemble, whether it's World War I, whether it's World War II, whether it's the Cold War in the 60s. But World War II specifically didn't start. There was no starters going. It wasn't like a game of footy where they fired the pistol and said, righto, game on, gents, war's underway. World War I was a little bit more like that, oddly enough, but World War II was a gradual slide into conflict. It actually started like a decade before 1939, but really started to heat up with Italy's incursion in Africa into Ethiopia. You had Hitler militarizing the Rhineland, which was meant to be a demilitarized zone, marched in there, nothing happened. Then you've got the handing over of Czechoslovakia. You've got the Spanish Civil War. You've got
Sino-Japanese War kicked off in 1937.
Exactly, the Japanese invading into China. And so war in three different theatres. At the time, they all seemed localised. They all seemed someone else's problem. The incumbent democracies, quite rightly, were scarred by what had happened in World War I, though. We don't want to repeat of that. So there was an excusing of every bit of bad behaviour as it went along incrementally. And what was actually underway was there wasn't express coordination between those powers. In some instances there were, right? But funnily enough, they were competing against one another as well, between fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, were competing against one another, but also cooperating. So, the Japanese were notionally allied with Nazi Germany, but of course the Nazis were helping the Chinese in the background to resist that invasion, and a whole heap of sort of, they're competing with the Italians for influence in Africa. But what they all agreed on was they hate the incumbent powers. They think that they should be running the show, and they want a world where might is right. So if you look at the world today, this bad guys club that I call them, Iran, North Korea, Xi's China, Putin's Russia, not formally aligned, though the Russians and the Chinese signed a friendship of no limits in 2022, just before the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. But they're all helping one another. Their coordination resembles something like a wartime economy.
I mean, the Iranians have been sending drones to the Russians, and now the Russians are
sending them back. And on October 7, right, now, you can debate what's happened since then, but on October 7, Hamas was using weapons from North Korea supplied to them by Iran to kill Israelis in Israel. At the same time, Russians were bombing Ukrainians using Iranian drones and reinforcing their lines with North Korean artillery and eventually troops. And of course, providing all the material in the background, all the funding with the Chinese, who were gorging themselves on Iranian and Russian oil and materials. So, that alliance has been there for a very long time. They've been coordinating amongst themselves, and increasing the coordination is becoming more systemic and more aligned. And they've all got their own individual ambitions. Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union as best he can. The Iranians want to have Shia Islamist sort of theology rule the Middle East, and they want to be the power that's dominant in that region. And obviously sort of competing with the Israelis, but competing with the Sunnis as well. And then, of course, Xi Jinping's Chinese Communist Party wants to dominate East Asia, first with Taiwan, but maybe eventually the world, right? So they've all got their own regional ambitions. Can't do it alone, but if they all push at the same time, it's quite a scary thing that could happen. Of course, within that as well, you've got a North Korea whose ambitions are more sort of survival as a regime, but they've also declared South Korea to be their principal enemy. They no longer believe in reunification. And if, in case you didn't believe him, Kim blew up the highways that connect north to south. So it's all pretty ugly stuff. And it's extraordinary to think that North Korean troops are serving alongside Russian troops inside Europe on a military front. And it's kind of been unremarked upon. And so does it look like World War III? It could very bloody well look like World War III, because a hell of a lot looks like, to me, the things that you were seeing in the lead up to World War II. But to your point, is it World War I, is it World War II, is it Cold War? It's kind of the worst of all elements, in my opinion. You've got World War I, the rise of Germany was the big scary thing for the incumbent powers. They felt crowded in. They felt they got late to the party in terms of colonialism, and they felt that the French and the English in particular were elbowing them out, Russians as well. And so, of course, then they thought they'd have an old-style imperial war, which no one was really ready for, because of the advent of new machinery and the advent of total warfare kind of changed war in a way that no one had really contemplated before. So there was that ugliness that came as a rise of a superpower that was rising and not accommodated. So it sounds a lot like the rising grievances of the Chinese Communist Party. World War II, we've covered, a bunch of bad guys working together to topple the incumbent system. Seems pretty relevant to me when I look at the world. And then, of course, the Cold War and the 60s, political violence, political dislocation, democracies unable to deliver, democracies losing credibility at home and abroad, and systems competing against them. Soviet Russia at the time in the 60s had beaten the West to space, was leading the world in terms of medicines, in terms of school outcomes, in terms of, whether it were true or not, the data may have been not particularly reliable, but certainly marketing a system that looked a hell of a lot better than the chaos and dysfunction of democracies
and
at the time.
Proxy conflicts, Misha,
Correct.
Conflicts.
Correct.
One cannot, I don't think it's a great leap of logic to understand the Israel-Gaza war for all its horrific death and casualties on the civilian side, but particularly in Gaza, there's a proxy conflict between Iran and Israel. And that's, again, that
without question,
that hallmarked the 50s and 60s Cold War.
The use of proxies is becoming more and more apparent, and Russian military arms are turning up all over the world, in Africa, in other parts of North Africa, Middle East. And you're right, Iran, not just in Gaza, but through Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, other proxy fighting groups around the world. And again, the objective is to cause chaos and destabilization in Western democratic nations. And so the objective is discord, and they're doing it well.
The World War, as people saw it in World War II and World War I, they were both very different conflicts, as you've articulated. And there is some school of thought out there internationally that World War III is again going to look very different. And going to your point, it probably did kick off with the invasion of Ukraine, and those powers that you've articulated have been working together leading up to that point. have been resourcing each other. And also, I think what's important is that we kind of view it through, again, World War II, World War One, through that lens, which is violence on the battlefield.
Yes.
I think World War III has got a different dimension to it, and it is the economy.
Absolutely.
And so, for example, China's recent announcement that they're going to prioritise iron ore shipments from Africa, which they've done a deal with to basically start shutting down their reliance on Australia. Right? Again, that's part of, I think China's going to fight this war in a very different asymmetrical way.
Without question, Kos, and you've nailed it. I mean, I talk about, we're talking about hot, kinetic conflict, right, at the moment, which is like the way people think about war. But there's been a different war underway here for 20 years, and it's a war on democracy by authoritarian regimes. And they've been fighting that, what's called the grey zone, or political warfare. And you absolutely nailed it. The difference between the Cold War and now is the Cold War was cleaner and easier to understand. There was an Iron Curtain. The systems were not aggregated or didn't really speak to one another, very separated. What you have now is economic integration, information integration, but political contest within that. So it's actually made society a battlefield. And so whether it's misinformation, disinformation, subversion, sabotage, these things have been fought by authoritarian regimes against us for a very, very long time. And they're designed to pull us apart from the inside. Now, why? Because it's a funny thing to think about. When we sit here in democracies, obviously we would prefer other nations and states to be democracies. Why? Because it's a better way, self-evidently, to live. But an authoritarian regime that keeps to itself, it's bad for the people that live there. But as a system, we can learn to accommodate it. We can work around that. We don't like it. We would rather it wasn't there. But spin that around. For authoritarian regimes, democracies are existential threats simply by existing. Why? Because they show people there's another way to live, right? And so they have to be destroyed, or if you can't destroy them, discredit them. And so what they want now is you'll see that the propaganda that is shown back into authoritarian regimes is, listen, you don't want this democracy stuff. Look at it. They can't govern themselves. They're completely dysfunctional. The inequality is rampant. The Soviets had similar propaganda, but the difference now is that authoritarian regimes are putting forward that you can have economic advancement without political freedom. So China, middle-class lifestyle in Shanghai can look dangerously like a middle-class lifestyle in Sydney, unless you've got a political opinion, in which case someone comes knocking on your door. And so that is now the major challenge for us, is how do we win that contest? So yes, we need to resist authoritarian regimes on the battlefield. We need to win in Ukraine because, one, it's the right thing for Ukrainians, but secondly, that a world where big countries destroy small countries is dangerous for a country like Australia. We cannot exist in a world where dictatorships destroy democracies, big countries destroy small countries because they don't like them. 25 million people occupying a continent. We can't survive in that world.
But that's the way we're heading, though, Misha.
Correct.
Big Z, the Big Z. Last year marked the first time in 20 years that the number of autocracies outnumbered the number of democracies in the world. So you've got 88 democracies, and even them that you wouldn't call...
not many of those are true democracies. So, I mean, what you've had is you've had a reduction in the total number of democracies and the total number of good democracies. So degradation internally within democracies, they've become more illiberal democracies like Hungary, like Turkey, other countries of that nature. And so there's been that slide, and then also just countries shifting from being democratic to not.
The headline stat is 71% of the world's population now live under autocratic rule.
That's right. And so we are the exception, not the rule. And also then, if you pull that out, Nick, across history, it's a blip. Right, the majority of time has not been spent, apart from the last couple of 100 years, for a very lucky few amount of people, of which we are included, have been allowed to live in countries where it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But here's the problem, Nick. Why are we losing this fight? It's not that we're just not resisting authoritarians around the world. It's also, and I know you guys talk about this a lot, and we've talked about this a lot, and I've written about it for Curtin and other things, is that democracies are no longer for delivering for people at home. So people are losing faith in them at home. And in geopolitics, result-based business, if you don't deliver at home, you can forget about winning abroad, right? And so we won the Cold War not because we had the better weapons, though in the end perhaps we did, but we had the better ideas. And it wasn't just the quality of the ideas, it was qualities of the outcome. And what I mean by that was West Berlin was fundamentally a better place to live if you live there economically, politically, in terms of your general way of life than East Berlin, which was fundamentally a shitty place to live. So humanity voted with its feet because the system was delivering for people. The combination of free societies and freer economies made middle-class lifestyles better for the majority. No longer necessarily the case. And so you're seeing it now because, your polling has shown that a lot recently. Nick, I know you're writing about this and I've been following, and thank you for what you said about my writing. Your writing's been right on point, both of you, on this stuff. I think it's, you guys are absolutely nailing the analysis. But people in democracies are saying this system is not delivering for me. If you're a young person, why should you believe in democracy? Because it's a better system. I mean, is it? Is it?
Yeah.
If it doesn't deliver for you, then why is it better? And so it can't just be an idea. People didn't go, you know what, Jefferson's got the better argument than Marx. They're like, no. The lifestyle, the outcome, the output is better, and we need to get back to that. Democracy has to win.
Well, and it's a certain type of democracy too, Misha, and I've been big on this. And some of my Liberal Party mates and conservative friends in their more honest moments in life. In fact, one of them made a really acute observation. He said it was the Social Democrats who won the Cold War, not the Liberal Conservatives. It was the Social Democrats. So during the Cold War, Misha, those conditions you're talking about, rising material living standards, home ownership as the norm, super high levels of unionisation. We had 50-60% of the workforce were union members. The unions weren't demonised. The welfare state had expanded. That was the Social Democratic Compact. And
right.
even the US of A, those 50s and 60s had all the hallmarks of a Social Democratic Compact. So whilst the Cold War was framed as sort of communism v capitalism, it was a particular type of
effective capitalism, right? Like the system, as we know, we're all unionists. You've got to knock the sharp edges off and make it a worthwhile society for which people to live in. We're not living in an economy, we're living in a society, right? And people feel the outcome that they get. And if you don't give people a chance to get an education, have a decent wage, be able to buy a home, raise a family, then what's it all about? What's it all for, right? We're not here to just kind of put people's GDP numbers up or post numbers that are impressive on a spreadsheet to say we beat the other side. So you're right, the lived experience. That's what I mean. The lived experience is vital. You're 100% right. I mean, one of the great heroes of many anti-fascists is George Orwell. One of the things I've forgotten about Orwell was just he was a massive unionist. And he hated inequality, right?
He went off to Spain and fight the Civil War.
But, he wrote The Road to Wigan Pier, which is about the sort of oppression of the British working class, right? Yeah. So that is important. You've got to resist totalitarianism, but it has to have a point. The point is a decent lifestyle for those who live in societies, right?
And fundamentally what's happened over the last 20 years is we have shipped offshore our capacity to, deliver to our society to protect the democratic institutions that we're all talking about. But more importantly, we did that by also enriching our opponents.
Well, it was a theory, right? Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that there was a peaceful rise doctrine, right, which at the time was China's going to get rich, then it's going to get democratic. The Chinese never actually signed on to that.
No.
In fact, Deng's maxim was that hide your brightness, bide your time. He never said it was bide your time. It was never, yes, let's down tools and give up, right? They actually looked at what happened to the Soviets in '89 and were horrified. They clamped down on the protests in their own country in Tiananmen Square. It's all, of course, been swept under the rug. They deny it ever happened. You can't Google Tiananmen Square inside China without just being told it's a beautiful square in the middle of Beijing. So they never actually agreed to the great experiment, which was to make China the world's manufacturing hub. Now, to your point, Kos, you can't defend the world with a market. You can't defend your nation with a market system. Who would have thought in COVID, right? It's easy to forget this now, but the coin of the realm at the time was hand sanitizers and face masks. We needed them. We didn't need them till we needed them. Where were they made? Wuhan, of all places, right?
That's right.
History's not ironic, if nothing else. But the ability to make the things when you need them is what sovereignty is.
That's right.
And what COVID has shown us and what this now oil crisis in Iran is showing us is that supply chains don't belong to businesses. They don't belong to industry sectors. They belong to governments.
Yes, and Misha, no one can say they weren't warned. No one can say that. I'm just looking, Kosy, at the curtinrc.org. I'm looking at special edition of Toxin, July 2020, issue 10, True Blue Deal, Australia after COVID-19. There's a little essay here, Kosy. M. Zelinsky, Sovereign Virtue. What does Misha point out 6 years ago? He pointed out the fact that we lack sovereign capability in terms we had a month's supply of fuel.
I did.
And what happened?
Nothing.
6 years.
No, so did Bill Shorten, by the way, in 2019.
Bill's in that. Get across to curtinrc.org, Curtinistas.
I need to come on this podcast more often. I get all my greatest back from this.
Well, but that is a great hit, mate. It was prescient. Very prescient.
Criticism. This is wonderful. But
very prescient.
No, it was. Look, the thing is, it doesn't take a genius to say how the hell is it that a serious nation state can only have 28 days of fuel when it is an island nation? What serious nation can put itself in that position? New Zealand's got 100 days. So, the idea that you would allow yourself to be at the whims of the market, of which is controlled by a potential principal adversary, is nuts, right? And also kind of the funny money approach to this as well. We said, well, okay, we don't need refineries. We don't need a reserve. We can keep it in the United States. The idea that you can get the oil that you need across the Pacific in the event of a conflict in the Pacific is questionable at best. But also the issue that you're dealing with, of course, is when push comes to shove, nations look after themselves, quite rightly, because their citizens expect them to, right? And so we're relying on the benevolent benefactors to look after us in a time of crisis. It's not a serious nation. Serious nations have the ability to look after themselves. We've got everything we need here apart from the wherewithal to do it. We've got a continent to ourselves. Now, that's by privilege, not by right. It requires, being, serious in the conduct of national affairs, and energy and the ability to call on it when you need it is central to everything. It's not just to fill up the car at the Bowser, as you guys know. It goes to the ability to plant crops. It goes to the ability to run the goods around that you need. It goes to the ability to export. It goes to the ability to keep food on the shelves. And if we run out of fuel, the shelves will be empty within a week, right? And it's a very real prospect. People laughed at us, Kos and Nick, when we were first talking about this, the Australian Workers Union. I remember talking about the Strait of Hormuz. People would look at me going, what are you talking about? And you say, well, the Iranians could potentially close this, and it's 40% of the world's oil-based trade, sea-based oil trade, 20% of total supply, 90% of the imported fuel that we get from Singapore, majority of that comes from the Middle East. What happens if the Iranians close it down? Oh, they would never close it down. What if they do? Well, they couldn't. Why couldn't they? Because the Americans would reopen it. Well, what we've now worked out is that asymmetry in these events is much easier. It's much easier to defend it and destroy than it is to open and protect, right? And the Iranians have now worked out a great thing, is that it's gone from the hypothetical. No one knew if they could do it. Now we know that they can. So they can choke the entire global supply and the entire global economy. And they've got an oil shock we haven't seen for 50 years playing out in the worst possible way. But also, we now have got a situation where we've shown our adversaries how asymmetry works, i.e., you don't have to have the entire strait blocked all the time. But if you could blow up 1 in 20 ships going through with a speedboat and an IED strapped to it, would you insure those ships?
Nope.
What's the risk premium that you're paying for things? And so this is where our business community, coming right back to what we were talking about before, our business community is completely and utterly addicted to cheap inputs, cheap labor, cheap overseas imports. The price is not the price you pay when it's cheap. The real price is the price you pay when you fucking need it. And that is the thing that we've been so foolish about and so casual about, and casual in a way that we couldn't possibly justify. It's one thing to have been casual about it after 1989 and said, look, end of history, you believe that doctrine, the world is moving to democracy, We're going to have globalization. China's going to get rich, and then it's going to get democratic. We're going to let them into World Trade Organization. Everyone was singing from this song sheet, and you know what? It makes a lot more sense if everyone actually sticks to the script. It is cheaper, and it is better, and it is a more productive way to do it. But of course, you're not dealing with necessarily good faith actors on the other side, right? People are happy to take the benefits for themselves of this system, but at the same time protect themselves or weaponize it in the worst case. And so we are well past time on calling bullshit on the naivety of this policy. Now, COVID should have been the wake-up call. I would argue that the wake-up call should have come when Xi Jinping was militarizing the South China Sea in 2014 or when Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014.
Oh, and Georgia in 2008.
Well, indeed, 2008. So you can go right back. But COVID had to be the absolute end of the myth that globalized markets can deliver you the things that you need when you need them in a crisis. Now, I'm not saying we should believe in autarky. Australia shouldn't be an autarkic economy. That'd be silly to make us a lot poorer. But in the Cold War, we traded with like-minded nations because one, Warsaw Pact countries and communist countries weren't really open for trade, but also because they were countries we could rely upon, right? So you don't need to reshore everything, but you should certainly friendshore it. You should be confident about where the stuff is coming from. And so we are dangerously exposed. We are not sovereign, really. We are a sovereign nation that is not in control of its sovereignty. So how sovereign are you?
And I think what's going to happen now is that all the, I would say, institutions in this country that have become accustomed to that world that I think is now dead. It ranges from even the environmental movement. Arguing for wind and solar being the solution to everything. Well, you can't actually do that anymore because you are now in a world that is competing for energy in a violent way.
Yeah, there's some real wicked problems here. So it's easy to say, look, we need to disentangle ourselves from authoritarian regimes. And when I look, I think not to plug my work again, Nick, but in a different piece.
Why not?
In a different piece that I wrote. Different piece that I wrote for the Toxin, I think. Talk about three big trends underway in the world. It's decoupling, i.e. the pulling apart between, democracies and authoritarian economies as best as possible, though it's extremely complex to do. Decarbonisation, i.e. the shift from, fossil fuel energy generation to clean energy. And then democracy, right? It's not completely neat, 3 Ds, but to me, they're the three big trends. But within them all, you got a really tough trade-offs. And you mentioned clean energy there, Kos. Would it be better for us to move as quickly as possible to decarbonisation? Yes. Would it be better for us to be electrified as quickly as possible? Yes. Clearly, we don't want to be importing oil necessarily from the Middle East, though we've got plenty of our own energy that we could be using. For example, with our natural gas, we should have a reserve in place. We should be having our own Australian price for our own gas rather than paying the international price for it, which is mental, but that's a whole separate policy stupidity. But should we put ourselves in a situation where our entire energy policy is at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party? No. So do we want to trade away our energy integrity from concerns about what Iran can do in the Strait of Hormuz to what Xi Jinping can do in Beijing and cutting us off from all manner of inputs of everything else that we need to run a modern, clean economy? So this is the devil's choice that we now have in front of us because we've lost the ability to manufacture anything. And so how you deal with that challenge of decarbonisation and in decoupling, it's easy to say, hey, we need to decouple. But to your point, Kos, you've got to tell a business person you're going to pay twice as much for that input now.
That's right.
Because that's the real sticker price. You can pay the Chinese price, but you're giving away democracy. Or, does a consumer want to pay twice as much for maybe not Australian-made, but Japanese-made good? It's democratic sticker price. But, in economics, there's a term called revealed preferences, right? And we used to see this when we talk about domestic-made, Australian-made goods, Australian cars. So do you support an Australian car industry? Yes, tick, 90%. What do you buy? Cheapest. So revealed preferences are a powerful thing. And so how we find a way to get those preferences right in the economy, and how we're going to deal with the inflationary pressures that come from decoupling. These are not easy things. But if we keep going down this path, we're going to lose our democracy. We're going to lose our sovereignty.
And the Australian public will demand from governments a drastic change in policy trajectory when it comes to energy going forward.
Right.
There's nothing more, I think, confronting for Australians than watching, for the second time now within 6 years, Australia being exposed to all the vulnerabilities that we've been talking about. And on this occasion, it's energy. And so when governments come out and say, well, we're going to transition to X, Y, and Z, punters are just not going to buy it. They say, no, I want you to guarantee that I can fill up my car when I can. And yes, I believe in solar and wind and so on, but don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
I guarantee you that. And then, of course, that's before they find out that most of the materials that require for solar panels come from where?
Yeah, exactly. Mainland communist China.
Correct.
So let me ask you this question then, Kos. How do you get the public ready for paying more? Like, the price of freedom is going to be more expensive, everything.
Yeah.
And that's tough, right? In a cost of living crisis where we know how toxic cost of living politics is for any government. Gas and groceries is a killer of governments. And we're going to have an inflationary breakout now because of this oil crisis. But how do you disentangle this without things costing more? It's pretty much impossible. It's not going to be free. I would argue that your sovereignty and your ability to stand on your own 2 feet, there's a price to be paid for that. But that's hard to convince people of that are struggling to pay the bills. So how do you tackle that problem?
It's pretty simple, right? And that is, do they prefer to pay $2.50 for a litre of petrol, or do they prefer to pay $2? Never going to get the oil price back. And so what you need to do is a government, and I'll say all our political institutions need to have this honest conversation with the Australian public about the world that we're all heading into, and it is one that's going to be drastically different to the one that we've all grown up in and been accustomed to. And if you want to know what that world feels like, well, you can take up that more. I would say you get to spend less on things that you like, or you can endure what the Ukrainian people are enduring, because that's the alternative.
Yeah, it's sobering message. It's not exactly great politics, though, is it?
No, but again, it's
honest.
Yes,
I mean, it's honest, right? I mean, it has the benefit of being honest. And look, I think again, this might have been your polling saying the Australian people are, probably ahead of the political class on how worried they are, right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the majority report to us is thinking that the next generation is going to have a drastically lesser quality of life than older generations. But equally, we'll go to the more important point, is that when you speak to particularly younger Australians, do you think there is an easy solution to all our problems? The answer is no. They don't believe it. And so they get angry at the political class when the political class runs out there and tries to fix existential problems with Band-Aids, or pretends these are not complex problems that require complex solutions. And yes, my life is not going to be cheaper. They know that already. Part of that grieving process that we're seeing politically expressed in the polling numbers. It hasn't settled yet, but the large chunk of Australians know 2019 is not coming back again. And they're grieving that, right?
Well, 2016 is not coming back again, Kos. I think can we just briefly talk about the elephant in the room, Misha? Donald J. Trump.
Okay.
Donald J. Trump. Because when we look at the parallels with the 1930s, FDR won a landslide election in 32, re-elected with a landslide in 36. Before they had limits, he won re-election in 1940. Donald J. Trump ain't no FDR.
No, he's not.
No.
Look,
that plays that that ties in very. That's not just a sledge against Trump, but it comes back to your argument that if we're in an existential conflict where the bad guys are saying to their people and to the majority of the world's population, listen, the liberal democracy thing, it doesn't work. Okay, you're going to have to put up with a few less rights, but we're going to make your life better. We don't need to go through this sham of democracy. And they can now point at Trump and say, this is what you get. This is what you get.
So there's 2 points I made there. First is it doesn't help the cause when the world's leading democracy is having a bit of a moment. And people say to me, well, where do you situate the United States under Donald Trump and the good guys, the bad guys? Well, they're still democracy, right? And democracies can course correct. That's what makes them great. We had George W. Bush in the Iraq War, which is a disaster, and then we got Barack Obama, right? So for every bad government, you can get a good government, and that's why democracies. People sometimes confuse my argument. They say, well, you say all democracies are great. I said, absolutely, I do not say that every democratic government is a good democratic government. I've got issues with many democratic governments, including Australian ones over time. John Howard was, I think, a disastrous government for this.
Yeah, no one was saying Ukraine was perfect. No one was saying Ukraine was
correct.
perfect for the invasion.
But it's a system that's capable of self-correction in a way that authoritarianism is not. So do we need the United States with their head in the game to win this fight? Absolutely, we do. Using a sporting analogy, US sport, in team democracy, Australia is like a wide receiver, right? In the NFL, we can catch like a nuclear sub or something, right? But the US is the quarterback. Uncle Sam is the quarterback. If the quarterback blows his brains out, we are in deep shit, right? So should we be concerned about what Trump is doing to democratic credibility, to US credibility around the world, leaving aside the fact that he's also leaving the United States woefully underprepared for a war in East Asia? They're shooting all their missiles. They're getting rid of all their interceptors. They're moving things out of South Korea into the Iranian theater. They're denying Ukraine the capacity to defend itself. So everything that anyone would wring their hands about in terms of what the United States is doing around the world, I share that critique. Having said that, have I given up on the United States? Absolutely not, because who the biggest critics of Donald Trump are? Americans, in a way that you don't get to hear from ordinary Chinese critiquing Xi Jinping, or ordinary Russians, look at Navalny, right, dead. So, don't give up on the US just yet. But yes, could the world have won World War II had the United States been a fascist power? No, it would have been a different outcome, right? So you're right to point that out. One thing I would say, Nick, about Donald Trump, and I think this has been missed, people are now waking up to it by necessity, but I think there is value in Donald Trump's critique when he says the rest of the world has been taking the piss and resting on its laurels by relying on the United States to do all the heavy lifting, be it militarily, be it geostrategically. NATO underspending has been a bugbear of every US administration since the 80s, since the end of the Cold War. Australia has been completely unserious about its military spending. Now, we're a long way away from the United States. We're in the neck of the woods where not everyone necessarily shares our view of the world. Now, we haven't really been good. We've spoken about our national, resilience in terms of our economics, right? So our manufacturing sector, our ability to have storage of the right things we need, terribly managed, right? But also just our hard power and our military is a joke.
Yes.
That's no one government by itself. That is a bipartisan shambles over 20 or 30 years. And so we are completely and utterly leaning on the American taxpayer to defend us. It's not really good enough, not for a serious nation. So when Donald Trump says other countries are ripping us off, they're not defending themselves, like there's some value and validity.
No, I think the Europeans have, the Europeans have actually have come around to that.
Yeah, they've been dragged, they're kicking and screaming by Donald Trump so it's like confusing the message with the messenger sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
So I think, it behooves us as serious nations to have done it anyway. You shouldn't take Trump and an unpredictable United States for us to take our own sovereignty and security seriously, but we should absolutely focus minds now. A lot's been made of Carney talking about middle powers. I don't really believe in middle powers. I don't know what that term really means. I believe in serious countries and unserious countries. You look at Singapore. It's a small place, but it's a serious country. They have a strategy in place for staying sovereign. We are a big country. We command a continent. We have access to the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. We are an important part of the world. We have every manner of resource you could possibly need. We've got a 21st century economy, 12th or 13th biggest economy in the world, 12th or 13th biggest economy in the world, 4th biggest savings of pension savings in the world. We're a superpower in every commodity, but we're an unserious thinking nation. And that people can blame the politicians, but also politicians, you get the government you deserve, you get the politicians.
Donald Horne's lucky country, mate. Was very clear on this 42 years ago, mate. It wasn't just third-rate politicians.
Second-rate people? What was it?
It was second-rate business leaders as well.
Yeah.
The only people who didn't get it, the only people who didn't cop a spray in that book was the average Australian, who he argued were adaptable and resilient.
I think we are. I think Australians are fascinating and brilliant people, but we have a challenge here in Australia, which is it's a high-quality problem, but it's a problem, right? So why can a country like Israel defend itself so well, where it's like a rock in the desert surrounded by its enemies with only several million people? Because they're enormously industrious and existential threats focus the mind, right? I think Australia has a different problem, which is abundance. So we got a lot of stuff. You can do very well in Australia, at least traditionally, relatively easily, right? She'll be right kind of culture. And I often say Australians want to be millionaires, not billionaires. Now, millionaires live comfortably, billionaires change the world, right? Typically. And so, we cash out, become millionaires and go to the beach. We're a lifestyle superpower. That's wonderful. There's a lot to commend for that. But there's a counterpoint to that, which is we tend to not be world leaders in innovation. We're good at ideas, not good at commercialization. We don't export businesses. We tend to export commodities because you kind of go, do you need to do that when we can already do this and go to the beach? That's our kind of national challenge, right? And we have to get ourselves out of that psychology. We must get serious about the business of being a nation state. The business of nationhood and statehood is serious business, and the world does not owe us a living, and we have not a God-given right to this continent, and we don't have a God-given right to being in a democracy. I believe that democracies must be defended, and they're the best way of living, but they're not the natural state of things. They are not the natural state of things.
Historical abnormality, that's for sure.
Absolutely. They're a blip, because they're a blip, and so they take people to defend them. There's no free ride here. Look at what Ukrainians are doing. They're dying for the idea of it. To your point, Nick, it was not exactly a sterling example of wonderful democracy. It was quite corrupt, still young, institutions were weak, but people believe that it exists and they want to protect it, right? And we have something that's so precious here in Australia, so lucky to have it, but it can be taken away from us, and it is gradually seeping through our fingers because we don't have agency. If you don't have the things that you need when you need them, then you do not have agency in a crisis. And for a serious nation to not have agency in a crisis, it cannot call itself serious. It's fundamentally unserious. And we have taken a lot of unserious decisions. So bringing it right back to Trump, he is a product of the anger of the time, right? I mean, inequality is rampant in the United States. I used to kind of scratch my head looking at their stats at how wild inequality was in the United States. You thought, well, maybe it's just a feature of the system and they just accept it. In the end, it bubbled out through, right? It presented itself in the 2016 primary through Sanders and Trump. The Democratic establishment stuck with Clinton, and in the end, the choice was Trump. And in the end, he's now metastasized into something completely different. And MAGA sort of nationalism is a much uglier version than what Trump was shopping in 2016, but still fundamentally comes back to a broken promise. The broken promise is the ability to work hard, play by the rules, get ahead, have a decent life. Not exactly the Australian way, but the US way was not too far removed from that. No. And so if the system doesn't deliver that, people get the shits and turn the apple cart over, right? And you say to people, hey, don't risk Trump. Risk what? I'm on my bones of my ass here. Same people in Brexit. Don't risk Brexit. Risk what? My job's gone. My community's fallen apart. We've got inequality. We've got deaths of despair. We've got rampant drug use and crime. What am I protecting against? I often think about when I was at LSE, when I was studying there, my professor, he's a brilliant guy. He was placed on these panels that went around the UK arguing the pro case and the against case for Brexit. So he was arguing for Remain, right? And he was sort of talking about GDP, et cetera, et cetera. And a worker in sort of Northern England puts his hand up and says, "You're talking about GDP?" He goes, "Well, that's your fucking GDP, not ours."
Correct.
We're not going to be worse off. And so even if it was irrational, it was hurting the people that have been lording it over you economically and culturally. And similar with Trump, even if he's not on your side, his enemies are your enemies, and you get to enjoy him driving your enemies crazy, right? And so
exactly what's driving One Nation's growth here in this country.
Exactly right.
Notion, their policies are no good. Well, that's not the point.
No, there's a set of people who have smugly taken all the economic gains,
That's right.
treated themselves like geniuses, and then turned around and said, by the way, you're a slob, you've used the world to retrograde, you're an idiot, I don't like the sports you play, I don't like your religion, I don't like where you live, I don't like your cultural practices, I don't like your education, I don't like your career, and I don't like the way you think about the world, but I'm your guy and I'm your party.
Where do you see the Iran-US-Israel war going?
Nowhere good.
Yeah, there was a good piece by Greg Sheridan actually in The Australian today. I recommend people read. He said it's either escalation or get out of there, and get out of there with the Strait of Hormuz under Iranian control. But
that's pretty much the choices. That's the choices facing the United States. Is they've seen the limits of hard power from the air. Right now, they could go in there and knock out the Iranian regime if they wanted to, but of course, it'd be a complete shambles. A far bigger country by population and geography than Iraq ever was. It'd be much, much harder, much more costly, many more deaths. Not really a great option. They can't open the straits, and Iran now has asymmetry to its advantage in the ways that we talked about before. What I'd also say here is the hidden benefit. Russia is a great victor of this war. They've got a pay rise out of this. No one's paying attention to the bombing that they're doing there. So like Lviv the other day, 100 meters from where I was living, Iranian drone flies straight into the middle of downtown Lviv into historic buildings that are, thousands of years old. Horrific behavior. That's happening writ large every day. And so they've got a pay rise out of this war because the oil and gas price is up. They're getting a breather on the battlefield because the Ukrainians aren't being supplied with anything. So they're a huge victor in this war. And so Putin wants to see the action keep going, right? He's not incentivized for this to stop. So there's that. There's a spoiler. And the other big victor in this, and a lot of people have talked about it, but The Economist has got a great cover saying, never stop your opponent when they're making a mistake, right? It's a saying ascribed to Napoleon. Xi Jinping looking at Trump. Trump's yelling at the media, and Xi Jinping's kind of smirking. The US has blown up its credibility internationally for the reason we discussed, and it's also run down its military enormously. Its ability to defend Taiwan right now would be enormously in question. So they're another big beneficiary. So what does the end of this look like? It doesn't look like it can't look like a US victory because they can't achieve it strategically. What I would say, and I think at some stage, is that the Chinese, they've got enormous supplies of oil. They've got like 7 months of supplies. No one knows for sure, but they supply a lot of their oil to the Middle East, but they're very energy self-sufficient. They've been doing this in the smart way, in the way that we haven't, right? So they're energy self-sufficient, whether it's oil, coal, renewables firmed by domestic coal. They're in good shape. Having said that, they're not going to be incentivized to see a world recession. The Chinese are a status quo power. They do like predictability. They don't like chaos in the way that the Russians like it, in the way that the Iranians prefer it. So they're going to want to see the world economy start to stabilize. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Chinese, heaven forbid, are the ones that strike some kind of outcome where oil starts to flow out of the Straits of Hormuz. The Iranians become out much more powerful. Even though their army is shattered, their regime is decapitated, they've now got a pay rise through oil and gas prices going up, and they're going to have a toll road through the Straits for a very, very, very long time. And everyone talks about going via the Red Sea. Well, they've got the Yemenis there, the Houthis in Yemen to disrupt that flow as well. So I think the big victors here, no matter what happens, is going to be the Chinese, to a lesser extent the Russians and the Iranians. The big losers is the United States, and the greatest losers of all this are people living in democracy. So it's very, very, very dark times ahead, Nick. I'd say it's another down payment further along to World War III, which feels like it's barreling down on us ever so quickly. I've got nothing good for you, in short, mate.
Yes, thank you for the uplifting conversation, Misha. No, but on a serious note, thank you. That was a really serious, in-depth, quality analysis of what on earth is going on in our world, and nothing good we can say this morning.
In the end, if you skip to the end, usually if the good guys get their act together right at the end, they tend to win, and we still are the good guys despite all our problems.
Yeah, but we're not living for that. This is not a Hollywood movie. Can I recommend people get over to Misha Zelinsky's Substack, beating the bad guys? Fabulous read on are we living through the beginnings of World War III, and jump on a Kossi's Redbridge Substack whilst you're there. Misha, thank you very much. We'll have to have you back on the pod when World War III is concluded, hopefully.
I'll be in a bunker somewhere.
Hopefully by then. Hopefully by the end of the year.
But look, it's a great pleasure. You guys have got a great podcast. You're doing wonderful work. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, so thank you so much. And keep up the great work. And everyone keep reading these two guys. You'll learn a lot. I know I did.
Thank you, Misha. The big Z. Thank you, Kung Fu Kos.
Thanks,
Thank you, Curtinisters. Until next time, it's ciao. Arrivederci.